Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is 3 p.m. East African time. My name is Mira Mogoto, and it is a pleasure to have you on board. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and you're joining us from. So we have been talking so much about Mali, and of course there has been an increase in activities, and so much has been happening since the recent coup of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in 2020, I believe. He died earlier this year in January there, and so Mali has been under constant turmoil, and they've been fighting the insurgency by the extremist groups, not just in Mali but other countries in the Sahel region. But this conflict predates way back, I think since independence from France in 1960. So today I'd like for us to just take a bit of a look back and see what could have been the genesis of the current conflict and the current turmoil that is being experienced in Mali, and then will bring us up to date to where Mali is today. After gaining independence from France in 1960, Mali endured decades of instability. While the majority of the population resides in the south, the Tuareg and Arab groups in the sparsely populated north rebelled against the government in 1963, in 1990 and 2006. And the reason why Mali's country is divided into two parts, not geographically, but somehow because of the differences in ideology, I guess. Mali is predominantly a Muslim country with about 94.8% of its population being Muslim. So religion is not really a thing. But majority of the population in Mali practice moderate, Islam. And so these extremist groups, as we all know, as the rest of other extremist groups that we've seen, usually they push for a more a more extremist sort of Islam practices. So the Tuaregs and the Arabs are in the north of Mali, and then we have the other population in the south of Mali. So because of how and the context of some of these issues, the country just found itself being divided in these lines. And numerous groups, including the Islamist militants, like I've said, have taken advantage of the government's inability to assert control over territory in the north by continuously, and this, as I will continue explaining on the show, is something that the Southerners, I think, systematically did, excluding the people from the north. And I think this created some level of apathy, and if you marginalize people, like we've seen in other parts of Africa where there have been calls for secession, people get uneasy, and that was the case of the TPLF, the Tigrayan People Liberation Front. They started as a group of a few amount of people that were agitating for their rights because they felt they were marginalized. So the Tuaregs and the Arabs in the north of Mali also felt a bit disfranchised from the country, and they felt that they were not properly being represented, and also properly their issues were not being addressed as those who were in the southern part of the country. And I would remind us that Mali is predominantly a Muslim country with about 94.8% of its population being a Muslim. And the current crisis, before we even get to the current crisis, I'd like for us to just look at a bit of that background information, because I think it's very important for us to understand a bit, part of the background of why the simmering conflict that has continued to engulf Mali is what it is today. And so, like I said, after Mali gained its independence in the 1960s, the new government had to assert its authority on a larger territory, including desert regions where Tuareg and Arab communities directly challenged its authority. So they did not like that. The people from the north, this already difficult task proved to be even more challenging because of the deep resentment of the Malian state officials towards sections of the northern population whom they regarded as the main obstacle to national unity. So the Malians in the south did not like the Malians in the north. I think they were quite different in terms of even their cultural practices. Mali has about 20 communities, and they considered the people to the north to be an impediment of the country's national unity. So the southern elites resolved to focus their political and economic efforts on the useful south of Mali, gradually marginalizing the north. As I have explained there earlier, they did marginalized the northern part of the country, and they imposed a more stringent, a more punitive military rule on those regions. So you can see the genesis of this conflict, this ethnic balkanization, if I may call it that, and ethnic tensions. And, of course, the people in the north feeling very excluded from matters of national importance, and simmering and historical rooted distrust had led to the four Tuareg and Arab uprising following independence. So there has been 4 Tuareg uprisings in 1963, in 1963, in 1991, in 2006 and 2012. And I'll just touch on this as we go on, especially that of 2012, that I think marked a turning point to where Mali is today. Even though peace agreements were signed and multiple demobilization programs implemented, none of them succeeded in mobilizing the relationship between the north and Bamako. So that relationship was already sour, and of course those repeated failures are in part a direct consequence of the Malian state strategy of taming the north. Okay, and in order to prevent one group from gaining too much influence and posing a threat to central state authority, Bamako sought to divide the northern front. Remember, the northern front made of the Tuaregs and the Arabs. So the southern part, the elites now decided to use a divide and rule and start inciting those communities in the north against each other. And so that is just a bit of that. Anyway, as we will see how perhaps the Algerian civil war that happened in the 90s, how that might have contributed also to this conflict, and also we shall look at the Libyan uprising in 2011 and the role it has played to fuel this conflict in Mali as far as the Tuareg people are concerned, and I will bring you that in a bit. But right now, I am joined by Dr. David Matanga. Doctor, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Miriam. I was trying to get as ready as possible.
All right, you do that then.
I'm getting ready.
Okay. All right, so as Doctor is getting ready, there is a civil war that happened in Nigeria in the 1990s involving the Tuaregs from Algeria. And the Tuareg people are a large Berber ethnic group that principally inhabit the Sahara in a vast of stretching far from southwestern of Libya to southern Algeria, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And traditionally nomadic pastoralists, small groups of Tuareg are also found in northern Nigeria, but very small group. And the Tuareg speaks languages of the same name, also known as the Tamasheg, which belong to the Berber branch of Afro-Asiatic family. The Tuaregs have been called the blue people for the indigo dye-colored clothes they traditionally wear and which stains their skin. They are semi-nomadic people who practice Islam and are descendants from the indigenous Berber communities of northern Africa. So we've seen the countries that they found, these Tuaregs, because we've seen, as I explained there earlier, there have been 4 Tuareg uprising in Mali, and that has been part of the phases of the conflict that we've seen. But of course, we've had 4 of them since the independence in 1960. The first one was in 1963, the other one in 1991, and 2006 and 2012. Doc, are you ready now? I was just giving a bit of a history of Mali's.
I'm ready now. Thank you very much, Miriam from Nairobi. Thank you very much, viewers, those who will pick this clip. Miriam, I am happy that you are tracing the conflict of Mali, and I'm ready to contribute to this topic as much as I know, because it is very, very important to find the root causes of these conflicts in this region. The conflict of Mali, Miriam, is similar to many conflicts in the Sahel region, only that One in Mali has been perennial. It has been the springboard, the source of the Al-Qaeda in Maghreb Al-Qaeda cell that started with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, and then it spread. It has been there. They change, they keep on changing from one to the other. Now ISIS has come in, but still the traditional rivalry has never ended, as you have explained, between the two, the tribes of the north and the south. Those names have been very, very much around. It is also the same through the trans-Saharan trade that took place between the city of Carthage, which is Tunis, and then the West African coast, which formed the triangle trade that used to take place around that region that supplied slaves, salt, diamond, iron ore, name it, all the things. So there is quite a complex, and it is good that you have decided this afternoon to look at that conflict. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll still just giving a bit of a background and thank you for that, Doc, for our viewers to understand how Mali arrived to where it is today, and to the point where France had to come back. And after 2012, I think France came in 2013. And they've lasted there for about 8 years, and you've seen them just pack their last a couple of weeks ago and left, Mali because of other factors. So I thought it was important for our viewers to really understand the basis and some of the historical factors that have lingered and that have contributed and have been fomenting for a long period of time that have made Mali to be where it is today. And I think a lot of it from the conversation and from my research that I was doing has to do with Doc, something that we've talked about here. A lot of times, all these conflict-ridden countries, when a part of the community or a part of the society feel that they're being marginalized, and that is how the Tuaregs and the Arabs and other communities, too, more from the north felt. There was no equality, and the southern part of Mali felt the northerners were not really contributing much, and they were a hindrance, to the unity of that country. So what they did is they just decided to systematically marginalize the people from the north. And I think also countries like Libya and also Algeria, because of their proximity to Mali, and they're very close to the northern part, both of these countries. When Muammar Gaddafi was the president, he used these Tuaregs, because there are also Tuaregs in Libya, so he used to use them for his own good in the country. And also Algeria wanting to exert also its a dominance in that region. They also have Tuaregs in Algeria. And so after the uprising in 2012, in Algeria, the Tuaregs who were in Algeria at that time came back, and also in Libya after the uprising in 2011, they came back with their arms back to Mali. So after they came back to Mali, they regrouped, and at that point, I think they formed what they called the Azawad, and they wanted to create their own country in the northern part of Mali. And so they took over as key towns like Timbuktu, like other areas and all that. So in 2012, thereabout, that's when France, I think after the calls by the then President Toumani Touré, his name was Amadou Toumani Touré, he asked for help, and so that's when, France stepped in. But of course, we know there are other factors that has to do with this war. We know in the desert, it became a very lucrative area, because that is where drugs, cocaine was being that was the pathway of cocaine and other activities. So a lot of people were benefiting, and this Tuaregs controlled actually the economy part of it in Mali, because they were engaging in these drug sales, and a lot of politicians, even from the southern part, were supporting this trade. And so also corruption also is a determining factor there. And what else? So the recent development In late May 2021, Mali's military carried out a coup against the central government, arresting and detaining interim President Bando and Prime Minister Mokhtar Wani. And Do and Wani sat at the helm of the transitional civilian government organized in the aftermath of a military coup in August 2020 by Colonel Goita, who led both coups, has assumed power and said that the new prime minister will be announced soon. And we've seen how that has played out. And so this president that was there, that was being supported by France, President Amadou Toumani Touré. A lot of things, Doc, were happening during his reign. That he's being used as a scapegoat a lot. When you look at the conflict today, that is because the international community, I think, were benefiting so much, especially the trade that has to do with cocaine and other illicit activities that were happening in the desert there. But the international community sort of looked at him like he was the best thing that has happened to Mali. And at that time, Mali was being hailed as a very strong democracy in Africa, but it was just a facade until, he was toppled when the insecurity and the Tuaregs were really advancing from the northern part. They had regrouped very well, and, they were able to take over some key major towns there in the northern part of Mali. And so France came to help. But France, I think the same thing, Doc, when you look at the KDF and Somalia, and sometimes you wonder, okay, so when is enough and when are we leaving Somalia? France, I think, might have overstayed its welcome after it went in to help in quelling and getting these, extremist groups out of there, which it did. Instead of leaving, France decided to stay. And after a while, the residents there felt like France was, interfering so much, and we know about France's interference. So I don't know what you can speak about the on overstaying of, some of these forces that we see, especially the way France is being accused of having overstayed its welcome in Mali.
Thank you very much, Miriam. First of all, for any war or for any peace to come, there must be what we call an exit strategy. If you don't have an exit strategy in any planning for any project, then you are bound to find the problem that France got into Mali. The continuation from 2012 to date, several armed groups have changed hands from the governments. The conflict has, instead of going down, has created more difficulties, more insecurity, including the North rebels, Islamists, coming deeper into central Mali, even as far as threatening to take over government. Now, Miriam, to understand this problem, you need to look at the traditional France, the Middle Ages France, the post-election France, and the current France. All the problems that you are saying on Mali are similar to the problems that most French or Francophone countries. Why do coups occur in Francophone states more prevalent than in the states of Anglo-speaking countries? I have answered that in my essay today, the longest essay that I've written, liberty to read. You can have a look at it and pick references from there. Why are there coups? It is a similar case to Mali. If you look at the old France, what was their aim of coming to colonize? Is to extract minerals, take resources, take labor. Compared to the British external hegemony that went out in the Caribbeans, integrated with the Caribbeans, produced a new format, a new race. Do we see a new race in the French countries? Have you found, for example, Jamaicans? Is equivalent of the Jamaicans in France? Where are they? So that can now give you the history of the conflict. So this conflict went on during post pre-independence. It became very clear that the founding fathers of the states of Francophone speaking countries were bitter about the exploitation which was being done, and you could see Mali lies in the trans-Saharan trade. The root, as you have already mentioned, the narcotics, the sale of narcotics, the sale of arms, the sale of all merchandise that you need from one coast to the other. Then look at the divide and rule tactic of assimilation, which will build you to inequality. Then it will build you up to the Operation Savo. When you look at Operation Savo, what were the aims of Operation Savo, which made the French stick there? They had gone, they had given independence, they maintained a base for looting, but in 2012, they came back with a more defined role, Operation Savo. Now, from the time of Operation Savo to date, Miriam, things have not been all right. Why? The military concentrated on taking more resources, the French back to Paris, than to equip the gentlemen who were actually on the ground, who were fighting this war. That's one reason why you have seen civilian governments had to pay homage to the government of France in order to survive. Because once you don't pay homage, you are overthrown by the French, at the instigation of the French. You have seen what happened in Sankara, in Burkina Faso. You have seen what has happened in Conde, Conakry. You have seen, look at, the pattern is the same. All the civilian presidents have gone off. Those who have remained there, like in Senegal, is standing because he's saying at night, please, don't overthrow me. But the moment he makes his head out and says, I am not in for this. So when he discussing the conflict, Miriam, of the Mali conflict, these are the factors that you can inject in and elaborate on them. The inequality, the divide and rule assimilation policy. What has it done to the current scenario? The failure by the Operation Savo that came to fight insurgency of the ISIS, the remnants of ISIS that had come from the Maghreb after the collapse of Libyan Empire, is what is causing the residues of the Libyan and the ISIS, the Al-Qaeda Libyan axis of cell of Al-Qaeda is what is the residue that we find today in Mali. And if you are careful, that look at the whole strip of Sahara region, most of the northern parts of these countries are not in good books. There is something wrong. Something has spread there, which is similar to something in Mali, and which is similar to something in Dakar, Senegal, and similar to something which is in Eritrea and Khartoum. Have you seen? Those are considered Sahara region. The Sahel region does not only stop when we talk about the Sahel region, Miriam. Some people think it is only West Africa. No, 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 no.
It comes to
It
Sudan.
extends up to the Red Sea. And look at the Red Sea. How peaceful is the Red Sea across? How peaceful is it? The calm waters, surely they continue to drill the oil in the Red Sea blocks. If you can see how Saudi Arabia controls its oil, they control it from very far away from the oil fields. They have taken topographical, pictures everywhere. Even the workers, the nut, the pipes, they can know that one pipe is not doing very well. So when you look at those type of things, Miriam, you can understand the geopolitical scenario where Mali finds itself at crossroads, that it is a trans-African trade route, has increased with a lot of inequalities. The army, it used to be civilians being toppled. Now the army topples the other. Another army regime comes to take another army regime. Why? Why? Look at the one in Burkina Faso. Why? They go and tell people that we must sentence the guy who killed Sankara, and they brought him. No sooner had the man landed in, after being sentenced in absentia, the military allowed him to walk free, because the conspirators who overthrew the government remained in touch with him. Now this new government has overthrown him and captured him. You can look, that's the same thing. And does it come to your notice that all the dictators who eat, take, kill, end up in Saudi Arabia? Does it come to you or cut you? Where is the former president of Mali?
He died.
Where did he died from where?
Oh, okay, Keita died from, is it
He
UAE or Saudi Arabia?
He died from Saudi Arabia. He was there for treatment and he died. Idi Amin, look at them. Idi Amin, there are so many of them. Musharraf, General Musharraf, in the Gulf states. So it looks like there is somebody who has a policy. When the French say, give him asylum or wherever he is, leave him alone, nobody will touch you. But time has come to question, what can we do to remove the inequalities? In your analysis of the conflict, how can this inequality be resolved? How many African countries in the Sahel region are going to have this type of upheavals, uprisings, military takeovers, killings, conflicts? How long will it take? And how much does it take for us to quell one? Who is behind? Who is fueling? You will see very soon another captain coming to take over this other captain. So what is the aim? The aim is to make sure that those countries never have peace, and that stability should never be there. Because a stable African country, Miriam, means no money, no resources, no food, no products, no raw materials arriving in the metros of Europe. I submit.
Very well. Thank you, Doc, for that. Of course, it appears the crafters of the Libyan uprising, the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi, the crafters of that coup and that scenario there did not factor in a number of things, and perhaps they overlooked the impact of what that would have meant to this continent, because it is after 2011, during the the uprising. After that, later on, that really we saw an increase or a start to even some of these extremist activities in that part of Africa that has now since spread to sub-Saharan Africa outside of the Maghreb. And that is because the Maghreb, which is the western part of North Africa together with Arab countries, when France, a foreign ministry looks at that as one thing, and then there's another section department that deals with African problems. So western part of North Africa and Arab world is one. The Mediterranean is looked at as a Mediterranean problem, and then Africa with a different department. So when you look at how they've been handling, especially how they handled Libya, they were looking at it from the perspective of the Mediterranean problem, and they did not consider that this is an African country, and this will be, the effects of this instability in Libya will be felt. So that, I think, was a bit of they overlooked that, and now we have to deal what we have to deal with here today. So perhaps should they start treating, because we see how they handle the northern part of Africa, especially the Maghreb region, the western part of northern Africa together with the Arab world. But it is about time they realize that these are countries here in the continent. So whatever happens in these countries, be it in Morocco, be it in Libya, be it in Mauritania, these are the effects of whatever is happening in these countries are going to be felt in the neighboring countries, which is in Africa. So should they change their approach as far as their foreign policy while approaching some of these issues is concerned? The Western world.
Miriam, it is very difficult for the Western world to be able to change their policy on Africa as far as we are concerned. The only countries that they change policy are the recruitive, naive countries where people come and take, for example, they tell you, I am not interested, we are not interested in seeing Miriam as a leader, but we are interested in seeing Dr. Matsanga as the leader of this country. And they dictate their terms, and then you lose your leadership. But we have not seen them take keen interest. I think that your question is, what have they taken a keen interest, surely, in making sure that
when they craft their foreign policy on Africa, they don't include Libya. Libya is included in the Mediterranean as a Mediterranean problem. They don't include Tunisia. They don't include they're in the Maghreb.
Because they, if you go to Libya, Miriam, it means you are going to a landmine. Your foreign policy will be eaten like a food in very early in the morning. You are the one who went to destroy Libya. Then you can't come to make a foreign policy that includes Libya. They are avoiding it.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when they treat it as a Mediterranean problem, and yet Libya is in Africa, and Africa is feeling now the effect. Look at how our many young people from the rest of the countries are dying in the Mediterranean because of the instability that is in Libya. Libya was very important as far as fortifying that region is concerned. So for them to keep looking at Libya and these Western North African countries as a Mediterranean problem, and yet they have to come to a realization that these are African countries, and perhaps they should look at an approach from an African perspective rather than a Mediterranean perspective. I think that's where I'm having a bit of a problem with their foreign policy, the Western world, and how they've grouped the Maghreb.
First of all, Miriam, it can also work differently, and I can ask you different way. Most of the Maghreb countries also treat themselves as more European than they are in Africa.
The countries in the Western North.
Take most of the countries in the Horn of Africa. They don't belong to Kenya. They love Kenya so much. But they don't talk about Kenya. When Kenya is in chaos, they would rather have it in chaos. But when there's an Arab country, Yemen, or anything happening in the Gulf states, most of the countries in the Horn of Africa, Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, Egypt, all of them will focus that side. And that is why there is a problem here, that there is relative stability from the top of the Suez Canal, below the Suez Canal, up to the top where Djibouti ends. After Djibouti, some things start. There is no man's land there now. Everybody for himself and God for us all. So this is where you find entry points for uniforms, entry points for charcoal, for milk, camel milk that is exported over to across. You know, I'm told it's very expensive to have milk from the camel, which is sold at a very high price across. So there is a lot of activities going there. But one question, as you say, is it us Africans who associated ourselves to the Mediterranean type of countries than the African countries? Even when you go to the AU, when you are doing a voting spree, if you are voting for any elective position, in the AU charter itself has cut us into those areas, Miriam. The Maghreb, the SADC, integration cannot come. The East African region.
So the Maghreb and the Sub-Saharan Africa.
And the Sub-Saharan Africa. So when you tell us Sub-Saharan as South of Sahara, Sub-Saharan Africa.
And the Maghreb. Then that's a problem.
Oh, we have a problem here.
That's a problem. But Doc, even as we look at this conflict, I think one thing is very prevalent. So as much as there is, of course, the factor of foreign interference, and France is in there, and other countries like Libya and Algeria, also events that happen in that country have had an impact on the stability of Mali, as we have already discussed there. But also Mali is a country that is deeply divided, which is very interesting, because 94.8% of its population is Islam. So it's predominantly a Muslim country. And so the Northerners, as I was explaining at the beginning of the show, they want more, the Tuaregs, the Arabs and others, for two other tribes up there. They want a more stringent Islamic state. You know, they wanted to create their own state, Azawad, up there. And I think these were informed by the Tuaregs who came back after Libya broke down, and then the civil war that was in Algeria in the 1990s. They all came back to the northern part of Mali. They intermarried and they took over that part of the country. So a long history. But also the disenfranchisement that we've seen, and we've mentioned that already, the inequality. This is a theme in all these countries that we've been looking at, Doc, that are suffering from some level of conflict. But most importantly is the division of the whole population, the division, the ethnic balkanization in a country, and perhaps what other countries can learn, you know, from Mali, because I think that is at the center of it. So these other factors, the external interference and these other ones, they just play into an already divided society, which is easier to just divide and further and conquer, as we've seen that play out. So the ethnic balkanization, and how we see, even in our Kenyan politics, that being used very dangerously by our leaders during political seasons. It's usually this tribe against that and all that. The dangers of that.
Miriam, the entire policy of our colonizers is balkanization.
Mm-hmm. They introduced that, and they did that very well.
Yes, balkanization. You balkanize them, identify them, separate them, then bring religion, Islamic, fundamentalism, fanatics. The Islam that was there before Mali went to chaos was a different type of Islam.
True.
The current Islam is not the Islam that you can preach in Mali, in some parts of Mali, because you will be called a radical or an Islamist. The type of Islam that is in Mali, or that was there before, which was brought, was a peaceful type of Islam.
Which is being practiced in the southern part of Mali.
yes, of coexistence. But what they did here is now to create extra, is like petrol. You add fuel, which is regular, but you go and get super, which is on top for the car to run faster and the valves to send the fire. So that's what they have done to most of the parts in the Sahara region. Don't tell me that the French don't know that this ISIS they are making. I can give you an example to cement my position. Look at, was Syria at war? Was Syria at war? Who was the first person to name, to tell the world that there is a group of terrorists that we want to take down Assad? It was the French. Then there came rebels, Maghreb, Al-Qaeda operatives. Honestly, Al-Qaeda operatives were armed by the French and America. And these Al-Qaeda operatives, after getting their arms, they went back to their cells and enclaves. And they said, aha, let's now play the West. Let's now target the West itself. Until Russia stepped in the middle and said, there is no way you can do whatever you do, but the battle will end in Aleppo. A very good city overlooking Mediterranean Sea was destroyed. The historical sites. Syria lost its usefulness. Yet Syria was one of the most stable countries, although it was accused of funding and equipping and supplying Hezbollah, which was a terrorist group that is found in Lebanon. Still, it had a progressive image of cutting down to some of the insecurity that we saw that spread the whole world. We didn't know ISIS. ISIS came from Syria. Look at the number of Syrians who are displaced, who were killed, who left their home because they could not stand war on either side. Miriam, Balkanization was at the center of the colonial mentality of harassing, of keeping Africa at check, or colonies at check. If you refuse, we shall bring in super oil, super petrol to burn you. Then as they burn you, we get the product. And product said, why are you burning us? A conflict starts. And that is how the French policy works in most of their French territories. I submit.
All right. Thank you so much. And as we end, the latest, France has withdrawn its final troops. They have left a couple of weeks ago, completing a withdrawal that ends a 9-year operation in the country at the center of the Sahel region's spiraling security crisis. France had initially intervened in the country at the request of Bamako in 2013 under Operation Serval to respond to an offensive by the ethnic Tuareg separatist movement, which had allied with Al-Qaeda affiliate in the country's north. Niger has now become the hub of French troops in the Sahel, with about 1,000 soldiers based in the capital Niamey, along with fighter jets, drones and helicopters. French officials told reporters last month another 300 to 400 would be dispatched for special operations from Niger troops in the border regions with Burkina Faso and Mali. And the French deployment had become increasingly unpopular with the Malian public in recent years, with many resenting the presence of the former colonizer in the country. France's relations with the government then dramatically declined followed consecutive coups in 2020 and 2021. The discord was fueled by French pressure for the military-led government to adopt a swift timeline for a return to civilian rules and pivot by Bamako towards Moscow. Mali's military leaders have denied the Russian mercenaries have been deployed to the country, saying instead it had invited Russian trainers to strengthen national defense. And of course, the Malian forces, Russian mercenaries, and various armed groups who often exploit communal tensions fueled by dwindling resources have been accused of committing massacres and extrajudicial killings, while a United Nations investigation has said French airstrikes have also killed dozens of civilians. To date, thousands of people have been killed in the insecurity, and more than 2 million civilians have been forced to flee their homes in central Mali, which is also the base of what is widely considered as the UN's most dangerous peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA. So that is the latest on that conflict, and I think this is a conversation that we shall continue having. So, Doc, it's interesting, even as we end this conversation, Mali had a problem with the military junta not giving it immediately the date for civilian transition, and yet in Chad, Mohammed Idris Deby had an extension, took another oath of office on Monday for another 2-year extension, but I don't hear any pressure from France. No pressure.
Look, it is an extension of what their policy is. They know, look, Miriam, they know who killed Idris Deby. They helped to kill him. Then they appeased his death by bringing the son as a leader. Now, several years, 2-3 years down the road, they have found that the son is not delivering. They have now started telling the brother to agitate for some changes. For those who don't know, and in Africa in general, those who don't know how the Western intelligence systems work, you can run around and play with them, open your teeth, laugh and enjoy and say they love you. I think for me, take a note, sit down and analyze how governments in Africa have fallen. Look at the death of Savimbi. Who mourns Savimbi today? Have you got the United States giving 1 day, listen, 1 day of holiday for Dr. Jonathan Savimbi? You hear about it? But this is a man who stood against the communists, the Cuban intervention, the MPLA, the American Western hegemony policies in Africa. He fought for them. They gave him money. They gave him arms. But none of them today celebrates Mr. Savimbi. So for Chad to have, okay, another country in Africa declare yourself and say, I've taken over military and I'm now going to extend. France would ban you, isn't it? France will be the first country to say, no, we have refused. Why did they refuse Mali, for example? What they refused in Mali, they have done it in Chad.
They've accepted, yeah, and they've endorsed it.
So, if for people, let's have a discussion, an open discussion. Why are there still coups, mostly prevalent in Africa, Francophone states in Africa? What? Why? Why? The reasons I've given in, I have sent the paper to Stephen in the morning. I expected him to have published it on Pan-African Forum here. Of this, here you can see behind, Pan-African Forum, www.panafricanforum.ltd.com. It will be there maybe a couple of hours. Get that paper if you're a student, if you are learning, if you want to learn, to know the reasons. I have put them there and I have analyzed properly and asked, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand why there are military coups. After reading that essay, come back to me, they give me 10 cents or half a cent. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Miriam, for holding the fort in Nairobi. I understand it's very cold, also very hot. And where we are here, you can't move an inch nose out. You have to be cold. Well, put on with coal and a coffee. So thank you very much. God bless you. See you again tomorrow. Tomorrow, Miriam, we shall have a relaxed day. Somalia has been removed from an arms embargo, Miriam.
They have? I talked about it in the morning. They have been removed. They were agitating for that.
Was it the question? Let's frame the question here for our viewers so that they can come as many millions. Is it the appropriate time for Somalia to be removed from an arms embargo? Or is it a disaster for the region where arms still flow? That is the question. Draw the map of Somalia on Matanga Africa Perspective in the morning on our big chat. We shall discuss that with all the correspondents dotted across the continent at 11 a.m. East African Standard Time. God bless you. I am Dr. Matanga, right from the London Command Center, to Miriam back in Nairobi, Aluta Container. Enjoy your high price of petrol. It is higher here.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for our viewers who are just trying to look at the history of the conflict that we are seeing in Mali. And we've tried tracing it back to since it got its independence from France in 1960. And there have been some Tuareg rebellions there 4 times. So the first one was in 1963, and we've just been looking at what has brought Mali to where it is today. Thank you so much. We'll see you here tomorrow, God willing. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.